Hello, I'm Steve le Fevre, and this is Tobacco Factory Television, where I meet the movers, the shakers, the opinion makers, and anybody else who's got a spare 20 minutes with something to say. If I was in charge for just a day, the world would be a much different place. Actually, probably best not. You can't play at politics, as President Trump demonstrated so well. What a barking few years it's been, though, since 2016. But through the madness, there seems to have been a change in the world order. We're certainly thinking much more about the planet. I'm not so sure we're thinking too much more about each other, judging from the divisions. My guests may have thoughts on that. A whole load of Greens has certainly upset the red apple cart at City Hall in Bristol, and in the mayoral race, a newcomer to frontline politics ran the incumbent Marvin Rees blimmin' close. So what does all this mean for the future of the city, and indeed my special guest? Welcome, Sandy Hore-Ruthven. Hello, Sandy.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. I mean, just now that the whole dust has settled, you've had a week or so to reflect on everything, you came so close. And you know, it was unexpected that it was going to be as close as that. How do you reflect on that whole campaign, Sandy? How do you look back on it?
Well, we're actually really pleased. Believe it or not, we did have a plan to achieve something close to what we achieved. We knew that there were plenty of communities out there that felt that they weren't being listened to by the Labour Party. We knew people were much more concerned about green issues. And so we actually thought we could do almost as well as we did. We exceeded our expectations, but we did know that the potential was out there. So we're really pleased with how we've done. It's been great fun too. You know, we've met so many wonderful people. We've got Greens now in new communities across the city, and I think it's good for the city. I think it's good for politics in the city too.
I mean, you've been around the party and everything, but, you know, as I mentioned, frontline politics, going for such a high-profile job in that sort of way. What were you thinking when you were watching your odds? I think they were, 50-1 at one stage, and then suddenly slashed and you're down to 5-1. Was the adrenaline rushing? What was going through your mind at that time?
Yeah, well, obviously we knew that the momentum was behind us. We could feel it on the doorstep. You could see it on social media. People were looking for that alternative. So you start to get hopeful about things. You start to hear people who you wouldn't normally think would support the Green Party starting to say, gosh, we think Greens are a real alternative. And actually, funny enough, it was the odds were as the odds started to swing, that got us the message that we needed, which was that it's really between Greens and Labour. You know, so often people are worried about, if you're left wing, you're worried about keeping the Conservatives out, so you just vote Labour. But I think people got the very clear message that really the Conservatives couldn't win or weren't likely to win in Bristol, and therefore you could take your pick of the more left-wing parties, and actually suddenly lots of people go Green.
Yeah, I mean, and what was it you were saying that they were saying to you on the doorstep? I understand you get protest votes and all of that, and tactical voting in politics and so on and so forth. But, you know, you've almost become the alternative Lib Dems now, haven't you? Who, when I arrived in this city 10 odd years ago, were in the supremacy. But have you sort of taken over the mantle? And what is there between you? What's the difference? What is it on the doorstep that we're saying, yeah, I like what the Greens stand for?
Certainly, it seems that nationally we are becoming the third, and certainly in Bristol, I'd say we're the second party. I mean, I think there's a number of things. When you ask what the difference is, I mean, clearly we have the environment and climate change and, you know, looking after our planet at the heart of what we do. And I think people, as you said in your introduction, are much more concerned about those issues and want to see real action rather than just the talk that we're seeing from politicians. But also, you know, in local politics, people want to know that they have contact with you, with your local councillor, that they can raise an issue, whether that's, fly tip or traffic on a street or air pollution or the buses that run down their road. They want to know that your local councillor or your mayor really cares about you. And I think that's what we spent a lot of time doing. This was very much our plan. We wanted to get out and listen to people and talk with them, find out what their issues were, and then create a manifesto built around that. And I think, I'm afraid to say, the Labour Party have been have not been doing that, and lo and behold, people have said, right, we want local politicians to listen to us and the issues that we're concerned about, and they voted Green.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come on to what happened in the council in a second, to that Green surge, and boy, was that close. You know, if you enjoy your politics as I do, you know, when something is neck and neck like that, it's incredibly exciting. But the mayoral side of things, and maybe this hasn't been reflected in the national politics as well so much, has it done well at council level, and somehow that doesn't quite transpose to the national picture. But a mayor is also a personality, Sandy. You know, it's also, they're buying into you, the person, as much maybe as the politics. Yeah. Were you aware of that? Did you in any way even play on that? Did you have advisors? Because it's a whole new game to you, taking on somebody of the, I suppose, the magnitude of Marvin Rees, you know, going into a second term and the whole Labour machinery behind him. You must have had a plan to execute that.
Yeah, well, so we were very clear. So you are absolutely right. And I think that is probably something I have learned more during the campaign, is how much people care about you as a person as well as your policies. But I think my history in the city is very much that I've been passionate about young people. I'm the chief executive of a now what is a large charity, and I think that really cuts. You know, in the past, Green politicians have often been well-meaning and haven't necessarily come with that sort of depth of experience in really getting things done and having a bit of a profile in the city. And I think that's something I brought, and you're right, my team around me kept saying, you must push yourself forward, you must point out to people what you've achieved, because, you know, people worry about the Greens not caring so much about, say, social equality or, you know, young people or, you know, our black and minority ethnic communities and that kind of thing. But it is something that I've worked with, people I've worked with all of my life. And I think, therefore, we were able to challenge Marvin very much. I was able to challenge Marvin very much on some of those social issues in a way many other Green candidates couldn't. And, you know, I was very clear that I was going to plant my flag very much on what was traditional Labour territory. People know we care as the Greens about the environment and climate change, but they don't necessarily know that we care about social justice and about people. So that was very much where I wanted to plant my flag. And, you know, lo and behold, it worked. And, you know, who knows what will happen next time.
What did you learn from politics through this whole thing? Because, you know, as you say, your Creative Youth Network, and you've made a fantastic success of that, and you've been protesting, you've led things in Africa and all sorts of things. You're a man who wants to get things done. But that's the good and a great side of making things happen, Sandy. But politics can be a very dirty business, and as you mentioned, as the personality steps above the parapet, you know, did you get trolled? Did you get a lot of stuff on social media that you weren't expecting? You know, were you prepared for the dirty side of what politics can bring?
Yeah, I did get trolled a little bit, and you get all sorts of people telling you should just go home and carry on hugging the trees, and, you know, and you know, just. There's sort of that kind of lack of respect and lack of engagement, really. I think what I really discovered, though, I think is the expectations that people have of you as a politician. You know, I was sort of asked whether I would personally resolve climate change at one end of the scale, and at the other end of the scale, whether I would, you know, my bin wasn't collected on Thursday night, what are you going to come and do about it? And I had to, you know, and literally everything in between. And I'm sure Marvin and other politicians get the same sort of thing. And you have to find in yourself what you feel is real, actually, and really where you genuinely think. You know, there was a point at which I was up on a green space down in South Bristol, meeting with local campaigners there who wanted to save it. But your job as a politician is to balance, you know, the need to protect our green spaces, and of course that's key. But also we have to balance that with you know, issues of homelessness and the housing crisis that we have in Bristol. So I had to find in myself that kind of I've got to be real here. I can't just promise everybody what they want. And, leading an organisation, you have to do that. Sometimes you have to make those difficult decisions that are often a compromise or a balance. So I didn't there wasn't a sort of clear answer because I didn't have all the facts in front of me. But I had to say to that campaign group, look, I can't promise you that I would protect every single bit of that green space. And that made for an interesting conversation initially. And they were like, oh, you're the Green Party. You can't do, you must protect absolutely everything. But by the end of the conversation, and that was quite sort of a challenge for me, but by the end of the conversation, we built a really good relationship. And I think they understood a bit more some of the housing issues that we faced. I understood better how much that green space meant to them. And I think that's where you can make really good decisions, is when you start to have that deep understanding of what local people feel, what the real issues are. So that was the real challenge for me, is to sort of to not promise the earth, literally, and be able to kind of find that right way through. But the right way through is so often to listen to people. And I have to say, I'm afraid this is where I think the Labour Party and Marvin haven't done that on things like Western Harbour, the issues of the underground and all those sorts of things. He hasn't listened to people, and that's the frustration that I think people have with him. However, clearly more people voted for him than me, so he must be doing something right.
Well, we could come on to issues like the Western Harbour and views being blocked or things being changed that people don't want to have changed. Let me just ask before we do that, though. You mentioned, people seeing you at the door say, well, you just go back home, you tree hugger and so on. And I suppose people do have the perception, or have had the perception, a bit with the Lib Dems as well in the early days, you're sandal wearing beards and, and hugging trees and looking after the environment. And it's almost like a one issue party. Is the next step for you to say, do you know what? We have got policies which involve industry and aerospace and all that, pushing forward and actually getting this region. I mean, there's a Metro Mayor and a Mayor, confused you will be. But, we have to take on the powerhouses of the North, don't we? And the Midlands and those great areas which get all the publicity all the time. Nobody mentions the West when it comes to the national picture. Is the Green Party, are you geared for that? Are you geared for the big industrial decisions as well as looking after the environment and young people and so on and housing?
Yes, absolutely. I think we are. And I think this is the irony. For a long time, the Green Party has had a range of policies on all sorts of issues, from industry, creating jobs, business. I'm for business. Business is a good thing. We create services and products that make our lives better. We just have to sort of manage them in a slightly different way. But I think people are beginning to wake up, and maybe this is what we've seen, certainly in Bristol, but maybe across the rest of the country too, is that actually the Green Party does have a whole suite of policies, but people are just waking up to that. And that, for me, we have to challenge the media sometimes and say, look, don't just talk to us about climate change or air pollution. Come and talk to us about housing. Come and talk to us about business. The heart of my campaign was our economic recovery from the pandemic. We have a huge hospitality industry and creative industries which have been really hit by the pandemic. And I have a plan to bring those companies and organisations back into full employment, back into sort of full business that would, of course, benefit our city but create jobs as well. So I think that the Green Party does have those sweet policies, but I think it's taking us a little bit too long to get that out there and help people realise that we are ready to govern and lead, actually. But it's just taking time to get that message out there.
Yeah, still just one MP, of course. What about going to be a mayor? You've described where you felt that Labour were letting the city down in some ways. But now we've got a mayor of Bristol, a Labour mayor of Bristol, and a Metro mayor or a WECA mayor, whatever we want to call it. Both, again, Labour. I'm very interested to see how they work together. Or are they of a completely same mind? Or is there going to be stalemate? Or what is, in a way, the point of this two-mayor system, and why don't we just have one greater Bristol area that's got a mayor that's going to represent the region at Westminster and across the rest of the country?
Because Bristol is one of the country's major cities, and it needs that leadership. And the thing, I think this whole election campaign has proved why we need a mayor. I know I've been involved in politics, not as a politician, but I've been.
Sorry, Sandy. No, sorry. I know why we need. I know why. Sorry to cut in. I know why we need a mayor, and I understand that leadership thing. I don't know why we need two mayors. I mean, Manchester, the greater Manchester area, and then the Midlands. They have a mayor, don't they? They don't have two mayors. So why on earth do we need two who are probably going to, in some ways down the line, butt horns at each other and end up with stalemate?
Well, I'll continue what I was saying, because I do think that the city of Bristol needs leadership. It is one of the great cities. And yes, there may be a clash, but isn't it better that we have two people banging the drum for our region and for our city? And I think it's important that Bristol gets its voice heard, even within the west of England. We're still stuck on a like sustainable transport. That despite the Labour Mayor's views on an underground, nothing has really moved forward. So you have to have somebody to really push forward Bristol's agenda within the region. We are the hub of that region. We are the main economic driver, job creator. We also have the biggest impact on our environment, and it's also the place where there's most inequality and those sorts of things. So I think we do have to have somebody to lead the city alongside the mayor for the region. And I think the two, if we get it right, the two can work very well together and actually amplify each other's messages. And that's what I'm hoping. One of the advantages of having two Labour mayors is that should be the case. We'll have to wait and see if Dan Norris and Marvin Rees come on. Clearly, they've already clashed a little bit over the underground. I'm not sure if Dan Norris is as convinced as Marvin is about that, but certainly we need a regional transport system, and we need to get cracking on it, because Bristol is so far behind every other big city in that matter.
Will you have any part to play, do you think? I know it's the politics, of course, come into play here with party politics and so on. But for somebody who got, 44% of the vote for mayor, have you had a call from Marvin? Yeah. We hear a lot about, cabinets of the talents and rainbow cabinets and all of that. They don't seem to have been working terribly well as far as that sort of thing is concerned over the past administration, as far as the rainbow cabinet is concerned. But surely, for somebody who's got the popularity vote that you got, you would have an awful lot to contribute. Will that happen in any form, do you think?
I don't know. That's obviously up to Marvin as to whether he wants to give me a call. I'm passionate about Bristol and would love to help as I can in any way. We have called for a rainbow cabinet with the councillors, and now with the two parties, the Greens and Labour, an equal number of councillors, I think there should be a rainbow cabinet to properly represent the city. I have to challenge Marvin a little bit on this. He talks about collaboration, he talks about conversation and working together, but I've seen no proof of that within the political sphere. And I think this is his opportunity to prove that he does want to work with others in the city, including the Greens. And I know that our councillors are interested in doing that and want to do the best for Bristol.
What do you think, your councillors, what effect will this have now that you've got 24 each? I mean, I suppose that the mayor will not be able to push through agenda just quite as easily as he would have been able to do before, but and very often there's been accusations that the council has been slightly sidelined in this mayoral system anyway. But what effect, what difference do you think we're going to see with that makeup of the council now that the Greens have got such a prominent part to play?
I think it's a question, and I think the mayoral model, it will depend partly on how Marvin plays his hand. He can continue potentially to sideline the council, but I think that would be a mistake. Certainly, the Green Party will be able to raise more issues in council, and the key the key thing is going to be the budget, where actually the mayor won't be able to get his budget through without full council approval and a majority. And I think that's where we're going to see some of the, clear green agendas, and from other parties too, that will mean that we'll see a greening of the budget, and therefore maybe more money for green issues, for actually the housing proposals that we put forward. Our housing proposals were more progressive, I think, more supportive of those who are the most vulnerable in our city, and we'd like to get those sorts of things back on the agenda, despite being rejected by Marvin in the budget in the spring of this year. So I think we'll have to wait and see. Again, Marvin is the leader of the city, and we're going to have to see how he plays it. But I think, the people of Bristol have sent a really clear message that they want green policies and approaches, and they want to be listened to. And I think the mayor would do well to do that, both in the council chamber and ideally by having a rainbow cabinet too.
And just a final question to you, Sandy. What's next for Sandy Hore-Ruthven? Have you got a taste for this full-time politics thing? MP? What's next? I mean, I know you've got obviously a creative youth network that you're fully involved with, but what's next for you? What do you want to do?
Oh, that's a good question. We're only a few days after the event now, so I sort of promised myself I wasn't going to make any big decisions, and I'm going to sit with Zoe, my partner, and work it out over the next few weeks. I've certainly enjoyed being in politics, sort of actually in some ways, funnily enough, more than I thought I would. The diversity of the city, the stories that told, that, I love kind of trying to work out what are quite significant challenges about the environment and housing and special educational needs, and, how we tackle our transport issues and those sorts of things. So I have really enjoyed it. I'm going to support our Green councillors behind the scenes for certain, but I'm not going to make any decisions right now about what happens next. There's a little while to go, and I'm just going to take a bit of a break, get back to the day job, carry on supporting young people, and think about it more.
You can't blame me for looking for the exclusive and asking the question. Let me ask you this one seriously. Finally, back to my fantasy at the beginning. If I was in charge for a day, boy, would it be different. If you were in charge for a day, and you could change just one thing, one of those many things that you wanted to change about Bristol, you could just go for one of them, Sandy. Yeah. And I'm giving you time here to put it at the front of your mind. What would it be?
Gosh, I think the biggest thing, look, it would take more than a day to do, but, I would love to see a proper mass transit system in our city. I think it's the biggest issue. It slows business down, it slows people down. But the fact that we all have to use our cars more often than we'd like means our air is more polluted. It stops people from getting to the jobs and opportunities that are available to them. So I think it's the single thing that would have the biggest impact. And, I'm going to add one little extra as well. I think and I know we've had a pandemic and that's difficult, but I think we've lost a bit of the sense of fun. Actually, I think we, they used to have sort of events and festivals, and our communities are so strong, and I'd love to see more of that sense of fun coming back to the city, more art out and about as well. I think that's something that Bristolians are really proud of and love, part of why people love living here. So I'd like to see a bit more of that coming back too.
Yeah, I'm right for you there. I'm also right for you with the transit. I'm a big tram man myself. I'll fly the flag for that. Sandy, I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us on Tobacco Factory Television. It's been fascinating hearing your thoughts extended a little bit. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Nice to see you. He's been one of the country's most straight-talking and knowledgeable experts throughout the pandemic. He's a member of Independent Sage and co-penned an editorial in the British Medical Journal calling into question the UK's response to the coronavirus crisis, describing it as too little, too late, too flawed. Bristol-based Professor Gabriel Scally joins me now. Gabriel, thanks very much indeed for coming on the show. First of all, independent sage, we hear those words so often. What are you, like the shadow cabinet of the science world? What exactly is independent sage?
Well, it was formed by Sir David King, who is a former government chief scientific advisor, a bit like Patrick Vallance, a predecessor of Patrick Vallance. And he and others, myself included, were very concerned that this science seemed to be secret. At the beginning of the pandemic response, the government wouldn't tell us who was a member of the official SAGE committee, the Scientific Advisory Group on Epidemics, on Emergencies. And they wouldn't let us see the papers or any of the scientific background documentation. So many of us, 12 or 13 of us got together under Sir David King's chairmanship to really talk about the science and explain it to people, and also to provide a rounded view, because we didn't feel that the official body was either operating in public or giving a proper scientific perspective on things.
So you take what you get from the government and obviously the government scientists, and then you can balance it with what we hear from others. I often wonder, from what's coming out from government, is it very carefully managed, the information that does come out? I mean, they're accused of perhaps being behind the times or being secretive or whatever, but there must be a certain amount of public management so that there isn't mass panic if the information isn't good.
There does have to be management, but I think most people would think it's been really, really over-managed, you know. And most of the communication has been via the Downing Street press conferences. You can now happily, one of the things that had happened on the day that Independent Sage was launched, the government decided to publish all the papers, the official papers, and it is valuable looking at what they are talking about and how they're formulating their advice to the politicians. But Independent Sage, we operate rather differently. We make our advice generally. We send it to the politicians, we send it to the officials, but we also talk to the public and brief the public, because we are experiencing this huge pandemic and it's affecting communities and people right across the country. And people want to learn about it, and they want to hear voices, and they want to hear, well, what are the differences of opinion? What really is the scientific view about how it should be dealt with? And then they can make up their own minds as to the position they take. So I think it's been immensely successful, and we have a huge number of people that watch the Independent Sage briefings every week, huge numbers.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that the response, which has been managed at national level and of course devolved level as well. But one thing I think you've been pressing a lot for is the fact that, well, it hasn't really been managed at public health local level. Do you think that that was a vast mistake from the word go?
We started the pandemic in a bad state, really, in terms of the management structure, because we didn't have a management structure in the country anymore. Over the last 10 years, it's been whittled away. There used to be government offices for the regions. There used to be regional health authorities and strategic health authorities for the regions. And I worked as a civil servant and a regional director of public health in those bodies. And there were strong local public health departments based in the NHS. And the NHS had a very strong public health function as a result. And all of that changed. The regional structures in the UK disappeared. A lot of power was centralised nationally. NHS England came into being. So the NHS is really run from the centre. And local directors of public health in local authorities had diminished roles, absolutely diminished budgets, and haven't been given the power and responsibility. In fact, they had no responsibility for infectious diseases coming into this pandemic. So it was in a bad state, and much of the infrastructure we did have had been repurposed to commissioning and contracting for services, not running things. So when the government wanted to make things happen, well, what they were left with were Downing Street press conferences, because there was very little they could do. They couldn't pull a gear lever that would enable a big response at local level, because the infrastructure just wasn't there anymore. And that has been, I think, one of the learning points and it's bound to come up in the future public inquiry as a really major problem.
Yeah, you mentioned that public inquiry. I mean, sadly, I don't think that we've got maybe 7 or 8 years to wait until the outcome of that, because people do want to know some of the answers now. But, I mean, we've got the science here. We've got some incredible brains. We're looking at the vaccine rollout, which is absolutely exemplary. Why, Gabriel, were there so many deaths in the United Kingdom? What does that come down to? It can't just be because we were a couple of weeks late with lockdown. What do you essentially put that down to?
Well, I think there are a range of factors, Steve. It's not possible to identify just one, but the key ones would be, well, we went into this pandemic in a bad state. You know, the health of the population of the UK, and particularly in England and Wales, was declining. Life expectancy had stalled. We're used to improving life expectancy, and over the last 100 years, it has steadily improved. Well, that steady improvement stopped in about 2012. And it's plateaued. And for some people, particularly women actually, in our most deprived communities, life expectancy has actually been falling. And we've seen record levels, for example, of drug-related deaths higher than they've ever been, record levels of diabetes, of sexually transmitted diseases, declines in cancer screening rates, declines in immunization rates. All of that added up to a health system and a public health system that wasn't working well, and a population that was really its health was under pressure going into it. So that was a big thing. And then the delay in putting measures into place, half-hearted measures, an over-reliance on national lockdowns, not having an effective find, test, trace, isolate and support system to deal with the virus at a local level. I mean, the problems were legion. One of the few things that has actually gone well, of course, has been the rollout of the vaccine. And maybe that's because it was given to the NHS to handle, and they've handled it extraordinarily well. And we're really lucky. If we hadn't had that, we would be in really deep difficulty yet again.
Really? I mean, the vaccine, because the NHS have handled that, as they have with everything else, brilliantly. But, I mean, I dread to think, when we look at countries like India and when we look around the world, what state would the United Kingdom be in if we were, as even with France, Germany, Europe, if we were at that stage of our vaccine? It beggars belief what state this country would be in right now.
Yeah, I think we would be really heading into a huge wave of cases. We may get a wave of cases, but I'm very hopeful that we can avoid that. And the vaccination has really come to our aid here. But Steve, you made the point about having to wait 7 or 8 years for an inquiry to come up with recommendations. I hope it can't be that long, because there is no guarantee that it'll be another 100 years before we have a pandemic. It's no guarantee it'll be 10 years. There's no guarantee it'll be 1 year. We actually really do need some rapid lessons to be learned about getting us fit for the future, to make sure that we're not swiped sideways by another pandemic. And we need to look at the countries that have really done so well. And what did they do? Places like Finland and Norway in Europe, or Japan, or New Zealand, Australia, Taiwan, all sorts of countries, most of them actually in the Far East, who've handled this so well and have not only avoided the terrible death toll that the UK has suffered, but avoided much of the economic consequences as well. We need to learn from elsewhere, and it would be one of my criticisms that we haven't looked enough at other countries and how they've handled it, and learned from them, copied them, and introduced those measures in the UK.
We've just a couple of quick questions on the vaccine, which you say obviously have come to our rescue over the hill, but and linking it into the government information and those briefings. AstraZeneca, the rest of Europe sort of held back, and we were sort of looking at them saying, what's wrong with you, for goodness sake? You know, these vaccines are going to sort it out. They held back, they resisted it. We again sort of looked out the side of our eyes at them, and yet they turned out to be right, didn't they? There are problems with that vaccine, so much so that we're putting age limits on it at the moment and so on. Reassure us, Gabriel, if you can, or tell us where we stand with these vaccines and how safe they are, and whether or not they were slightly rushed in bringing them out?
Well, the trials data for the vaccines were pretty good. In fact, I think most people involved in development of the vaccines would say they were remarkably good, and the effectiveness of the vaccines was higher, I think, than anyone had the right to expect. The AstraZeneca vaccine has had these problems with clots, but very, very small numbers. And when you think of the numbers of cases that we were having of the virus and the number of deaths the virus was causing, well, the risk from the AstraZeneca vaccine was really, really, really small compared to the benefit of avoiding those deaths. And particularly so because the data about where those clots occurred in terms of age profile, in terms of people's age and in terms of their gender and so on, indicated that we really did need to avoid giving that particular vaccine to that younger population, and particularly to women. So that's what happened. And I think that was a very reasonable way forward. And going forward, of course, we will learn all these lessons. And because vaccines shouldn't be regarded as the complete solution, because in fact, talking of the AstraZeneca one started to be used in South Africa, and they stopped because they found that the effectiveness was really much lowered when it came to dealing with the South African variant. And I believe they're still not using it in South Africa for that very reason. So the more vaccines we have, the better prepared we'll be to deal with this virus going forward, because we can mix and match and use the right vaccine for the right age groups in the right places, and try and keep it as effective as possible in an era where dangerous variants are emerging.
And that looks like what might be happening in the north of England at the moment, in Bolton and places where there is the Indian variant, and the problem perhaps is focusing a lot of the vaccines to the younger people who are going to need it there. How worried should we be, quite honestly, about this Indian variant as we look forward to releasing ourselves from the restrictions over the next couple of months?
Well, what we know as we speak, Steve, is that it is a very, very infectious variant. And infectivity is one of the most dangerous things because, as everyone knows now, this word exponential, you can have a really steep acceleration in the number of cases. We don't know yet whether it will be more serious in terms of producing illness and death. We don't know yet how much, or if at all, it manages to evade some of the immunity given by the vaccine. But it is a very dangerous variant, and that's why I've been arguing we should be throwing the kitchen sink at it in the local areas where there are now significant numbers. And that includes putting extra vaccination resources, both vaccine and vaccinators, into that area, and extending the age groups, because the highest levels of infection we're seeing are actually in younger people, and that's often been the case because it's younger people who are major transmitters of it, and they're the people who are socializing more. And it makes sense to put some of our vaccine resources into those areas and vaccinate everyone who's eligible to get a vaccination, and that should be everyone 18 and over, to try and break it and suppress it in that area. The other thing we should do, and we don't do, is we should test all close contacts. It's amazing. The international guidance is very clear. The people at highest risk are the close contacts of people who have tested positive. And in the UK, we just tell them to self-isolate and come for testing if they get symptoms. But we should be testing all of them. Some of them may not get symptoms, but could be infectious. So a really intensive local input led by the directors of public health. And we need to get used to this, because we will see outbreaks and upsurges of the vaccine over the next year or two, no doubt. And we need to get our local responses ready and able to jump on it at the earliest possible opportunity.
What do you say to the COVID deniers, Gabriel? What do you say to the, I'm not lumping them into the same category, but the anti-vaxxers, or the people who but perhaps have got a genuine cynicism about what they're being told by government, and perhaps that gets in the way of what they would otherwise do? It must be distressing to watch people who are not taking perhaps this as seriously as they should.
I really care most about those people who are vaccine hesitant, because they've heard these voices off stage, saying that, about Bill Gates injecting people with microchips and all sorts of drivel and nonsense going around. And what we do need is people hearing other voices and being able to get advice from their GPs, from nurses, from experts who actually know what they're talking about what is the right thing to do. And I'm perfectly convinced that most people will take the vaccine because it's so beneficial for us all. And the higher the level of vaccination we get, the less chance we have of getting outbreaks. And we should remember that there are some people who can't have the vaccine because they have underlying health conditions, like a severe allergy, that mean they can't be vaccinated. And our best chance of protecting those people and letting them play a part in the, to go to work or into education or whatever, or to mix socially, is that the rest of us who can have the vaccine do get it and do take advantage of it by making the whole population safer. So I think vaccination is absolutely key, and we do need to get the messages out there and get them from trusted sources and be able to talk to friends and relatives who might be anxious or worried about it and be able to talk through the issues with them. There's plenty of good information available online for people.
All right. Well, I know you've got an Independence Age meeting shortly after this interview and a very busy day. I really appreciate you taking the time, Gabriel. It's been fascinating as ever talking to you. Thank you very much indeed.
A pleasure to join you.
So huge thanks to my special guest today, Sandy Hore-Ruthven and Professor Gabriel Scally. Plenty more great interviews coming up on the Tobacco Factory TV YouTube channel. Please do press that subscribe button. And you can get in touch with us on Twitter using hashtag Tobacco Factory TV. But for now, from me until the next time, it's bye-bye.